6, because you have to sit in your car at 6. I will make sure that this happens. And we want to hear more about your assessment of the way forward now. Just a few introductory remarks. Yesterday we had the Secretary General of the European External Action Service, Stefano Sannino, here, and we already heard him describe the work now towards the adoption of the third EU-NATO joint declaration. So we as European Parliament have called for the swift work on an EU-NATO joint declaration. We hope that you can tell us more about the way forward on this matter. We also followed that NATO allies adopted the new strategic concept, which is clear on the fact that NATO wants a closer strategic partnership with the EU. So it's about strengthening the basis of our cooperation on issues of common interest. Before I give the floor to you, and we want to hear you, that's why I want to be brief, I will first give the floor to our Vice Chair of SEDE, Raza Juknevičiene, for a few introductory remarks. There you are, Raza, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Thank you, David. I appreciate this very timely and important exchange. On behalf of the Subcommittee on Security and Defense, a warm welcome to you, Mr. Stoltenberg. Welcome. We are grateful that you regularly engage with this Parliament. First of all, let me congratulate you and NATO as a whole for a successful summit where historic decisions were taken. While Russia's brutal war of aggression against Ukraine is ongoing, allied nations upheld their spirit, maintained their determination, and reinforced transatlantic unity. I thank you for your leadership in these turbulent times. In the summit, allies updated NATO's strategic concept and defined new strategic orientations for the alliance. By the way, in 2010, I attended the NATO summit in Lisbon, where the strategy was adopted that had been in place until Madrid. At the time, I was already deeply concerned that NATO had failed to assess threats realistically. In the new NATO strategy adopted in Madrid, the threat of Russia is finally realistically evaluated as most significant and direct threat. Lessons learned. Congratulations. And now it is crucial that NATO's new defense plans correspond to this new evaluation of threats, and I would like very much to hear from you whether this new formulation means that NATO's defense plans and capabilities will be adapted to tackle this threat, what it will mean in practice for the alliance. Summit reinforced the open door policy and invited Sweden and Finland to join NATO, as well as strengthen cooperation with like-minded partners in the Asia-Pacific region. But here I would like to stress, to underline that also we are witnessing the birth on the battlefield of a new, strong future NATO army, the Ukrainian army. And strategic compass for Europe today is fighting Ukraine. I am particularly delighted to see also as Lithuanian MP the strong message sent to Putin's Russia and the decision to reestablish a credible deterrence posture on the eastern flank, but there is still much to be done. Airspace is not sufficiently protected. So, David already mentioned the EU-NATO strategic partnership. I will not go further into the details, just encouraging also NATO to consider all these priorities in NATO-EU cooperation, a joint declaration. In this respect, I am wondering about when this document is planned to be signed between EU and NATO principle, and of course on military equipment to Ukraine. It's also very important to hear from you. So, Mr. Secretary General, thank you again for joining us, and looking forward to further deepening EU-NATO enlargement is very, very important, especially in these days.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to the Chair of the Delegation for Relations with the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, Mr. van Denken de Lare.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Secretary General. On behalf also of the Parliament's delegation for relations with the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, I wish to commend you and the allies for a very successful summit in Madrid. We once again, I think, demonstrated real transatlantic unity and determination. More NATO, more cooperation is the response to acts of war, acts of confrontation and division. Allow me to focus my remarks on 3 questions for you on EU-NATO cooperation, because we share today similar strategic orientations with our compass and your strategic concept. And the priorities now need to be put into action. I think about strengthening military and security cooperation both in the East and the South. I think about supporting the countries of the Western Balkans against malicious foreign interference by third countries. I think about our coordinated approach towards China, coordinated approach also in the Indo-Pacific, and indeed our common action on the international stage to protect democracy. And I would hope that you could take on board these recommendations, priorities for the upcoming joint declaration. Now, in the list of priorities, the last point I brought up, the care for our democracies, is, I think, one thing I wish to highlight. Because in a joint letter addressed by NATO PA President Connolly and myself to the Presidents of the Commission and the Council and to you, we urged to place the shared democratic values of NATO and the EU at the heart of the upcoming joint declaration. We should draw our strength from our commitment to shared democratic values and institutions, and as pointed out in the joint letter I just mentioned to you, the NATO Parliamentary Assembly has recommended the NATO to establish a Centre for Democratic Resilience. It's an initiative which is also supported by a number of NATO members, and I'm interested, first of all, to hear your views on this proposal, and also as to the role the EU could play with regard to this initiative. A second question on the new joint declaration would be to hear your views on the impact of both the strategic concept and the compass on the well-known set of common proposals with 74 projects to operationalize and advance our cooperation. Will we revise this list? Will we update it? Will we complete it? What is the way forward for these 74 projects? And a final question is, again, on the concept and the compass. How can we optimize our synergies between those distinct but very similar strategic orientations? How can we coordinate in the best possible way our actions to make sure both the concept and the compass get realized? As always, thank you for exchanging with us, and I look forward to your replies.
Thank you, Raza and Tom, for your introductory remarks. Colleagues, I would propose that I now give the floor to the Secretary-General for his introductory remarks, and then we will have at least 1 or 2 rounds of Q&A sessions. Of course, all the coordinators and others will get the floor. But I would now first like to give Secretary-General Stoltenberg the floor.
Thank you so much, and many thanks for the warm words as an introduction, and thank you for once again inviting me to address this audience. It is always a pleasure for me as Secretary General of NATO to meet the NATO parliamentarians, and for me, these engagements are a way to actually make sure that we are constantly developing and strengthening the cooperation between the EU and NATO. So, David, thank you so much, and also to the vice chairs for inviting me. I understand that there are many questions, so I will be very brief. But let me just say that for me it is particularly relevant to be here so shortly after the NATO summit. We had a summit in Madrid just a few days ago, and at that summit we reiterated the strong support in NATO to cooperation between the European Union and NATO. Both President von der Leyen and President Charles Michel participated in the meeting, and we all understand that EU and NATO, we are 2 different organizations, but we share many of the same challenges, we share the same neighborhood, and we work more and more closely together. We also seen that in light of the war, the crisis in Ukraine, the economic sanctions imposed by the European Union, all the support to Ukraine provided by the European Union works very well hand in hand with the efforts of NATO allies, also to impose sanctions, but also to provide significant military and economic support to Ukraine, and it really demonstrates the unity of the European Union and NATO. And it was also actually raised the issue of a new joint declaration. I have the privilege of signing a joint declaration on NATO-EU cooperation with 2 times actually with President Donald Tusk and President Jean-Claude Juncker. And now von der Leyen and Michel and I have agreed that we should look into the third declaration. I'm not able to tell you exactly when we will be able to have a third declaration, but it is something which is now supported by both the 2 EU presidents and me, so we will start to work on that as soon as possible. I think it's useful to have a declaration to outline the main priorities and also to ensure that the 74 projects we have already identified, that we are following up and implementing those. Then briefly on the summit, it was a historic and transformative summit. We made many important decisions, but again, taking into account that we need time for the discussions and your comments and questions afterwards, I would just mention 4 of the main decisions and all are relevant also for Europe and the European Union. First, we agreed to step up support for Ukraine. As you know, NATO allies provide unprecedented level of military support to Ukraine. Actually, NATO allies and NATO have been there since 2014, trained, equipped, and supported the Ukrainian armed forces. But of course, since the invasion in February, allies have stepped up significantly, and we also agreed a comprehensive assistance package, also on how to help Ukraine to move from Soviet-era equipment to more modern NATO standard equipment, and also how to provide more support also for the longer term, building defense and security institutions in Ukraine. The message was that we will provide support for as long as it takes. No one can predict exactly when this war will end, but what we do know is that the more we are able to provide support to Ukraine, of course, the more we increase the possibility, the likelihood of an end to this war, which happens on acceptable terms for Ukraine, and that's our responsibility to help them uphold the right for self-defense, and that's exactly what NATO allies do, and that was also the clear message from Madrid, at the same time stating that NATO is not part of the war. We support Ukraine, a highly valued ally, but NATO would not be directly involved in the fighting on the ground in Ukraine. Second, we agreed the biggest overhaul, fundamental shift in our deterrence and defense since the Cold War. Over all domains, across all domains, air, sea, land, cyberspace, because we live in a more dangerous world, and therefore NATO needs to do more for our core task, protection of all allies. When it comes to the land domain, which has been perhaps the area where there has been most focus, what we do is based on, I would say, 3 main elements. One is more forward defense, meaning more troops, especially in the eastern part of the alliance. We have already increased our presence after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have doubled the number of battle groups from 4 to 8. So now we have battle groups not only in the Baltic countries and Poland, but also in Romania, Slovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria. And we have actually doubled the size of the battle groups with more troops in each of the battle groups. We have then agreed to further increase more troops to conduct forward defense, forward presence, and also stated that we can scale this up to brigade level size, which is significantly more than the battalions that formed the original battle groups in the eastern part of the alliance. Then we will, and this is building, of course, on what we have already done. As you know, now we have 42,000 troops, mainly in the eastern part of the alliance, under direct NATO command, as a direct response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Then this will be supported by more high readiness forces. And in the new defense plans and the work which is now going on and agreed by the heads of state and government, this is something we have to implement in the following year. The plan is to have around, or actually above, 300,000 troops on high readiness across the alliance. These troops most of them will be in their home countries. But they will be, many of them will have pre-assigned territories they should defend. They will train, exercise there on a regular basis. And Germany has already announced that they will have a brigade in Germany, but that will rotate in and out of Lithuania. So they will know the terrain, know how to work with the home defense forces, and be prepared to deploy there in times of crisis. So these are not permanently deployed, but they are pre-assigned, earmarked forces, high readiness that can be deployed to different parts of the alliance, especially the eastern part of the alliance, on short notice. So the second element is high readiness forces. The third element is much more pre-positioned equipment. It's actually quite easy to move people, personnel. What takes time is to move heavy equipment, ammunition, fuel. So the idea is to have partly more forces in place, partly more high readiness forces regularly exercising, and then pre-positioned equipment in place. And by having that, we can reinforce quickly if needed, and that's the main elements of the defense concept for agreed at the Madrid summit. Then the third decision I will mention for you is, of course, the decision to invite Finland and Sweden to join. That's an historic decision. And it was important that all 30 allies agreed to invite Finland and Sweden. And now what remains, and we have signed the accession protocol, so now we need the ratification in 30 parliaments. And as soon as that happens, Finland and Sweden will be members of NATO. This is good for Finland and Sweden, it's good for NATO, and it's good for stability throughout the Euro-Atlantic area. And it also demonstrates that NATO's door is open. You have to remember that as late as in December, President Putin proposed to NATO a so-called security treaty that we should sign, saying many things, but among the things he wanted us to sign was, first of all, to guarantee no more new members of NATO. Sign. Second, that we should remove all troops and infrastructure from members of NATO that have joined after 1997. Meaning that all the members in the eastern part of the alliance should not have NATO troops, no NATO infrastructure, introducing second-class NATO membership. Of course, we didn't accept this. He invaded Ukraine because he wanted less NATO on his borders. What President Putin is getting is more NATO. He's getting exactly the opposite. More NATO military presence in the eastern part of the alliance and 2 new NATO members. And NATO's door remains open, demonstrated by Finland and Sweden. The fourth decision we made was the new strategic concept. You can read it. It's a beautiful document. And you have your strategic compass, and of course they are again different documents, but they reflect the same reality, and that's a good thing. Reflecting, of course, that we very much share also the same members. The important thing with this strategic concept is that we agree as an alliance on the strategic direction of this alliance in a more dangerous, more competitive, and more unpredictable world. And I was present in Lisbon when we agreed the previous current concept that actually expired at the Madrid summit a few days ago. At that summit, at that time, President Medvedev was present from Russia, attended the NATO meeting, and in the concept we agreed that Russia was a strategic partner. That's not the case in the current strategic concept. There we actually address clearly that Russia poses the most direct threat to our security. And we also mentioned China in the previous strategic concept. China was not mentioned with a single word. Now we address the challenges that China poses to our interests, to our values, to our security, and also that China and Russia are working more and more closely together. We address cyber, climate change, technology, and many other issues. Then I would like to say that it is also important to say that these strategic, the strategic concept also, of course, takes a very clear stand on the importance of democratic values, of human rights and the rule of law, which are core values for NATO, and I attach great importance to them myself. And as the president of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly stated, Congressman Connolly, he attended the meeting, and he stated very clearly the importance of this and also democratic resilience, and this was addressed and also then reflected in the strategic concept. Then again, I promise to be short. Many other issues I got to address. I'm sure you have many answers and comments. So I stop there just by highlighting that it's good to see that two different organizations, NATO and the EU, we have more and more in common, and we work more and more closely together. And that's good for EU, it's good for NATO, and it's good for all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Secretary General, dear Jens, for this excellent presentation. And we have many, many colleagues now who want to take the floor. Let's see how far we can get. If you limit yourselves to 2 minutes each, I can give the floor to more colleagues. We begin with the round of coordinators, and the first is Michael Gahler for the EPP.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. Thanks for your leadership and for your clear words that we just heard. On the third joint declaration that is planned, you referred to the 74 projects planned in the second joint declaration. I wonder where we stand, and should we not focus more on the real things? And if you have 74 projects, you have no priorities. I would wish that we come to real issues and priorities there. You pledged to step up, and I'm the standing rapporteur of Ukraine, so I focus on that. You pledged to step up support for Ukraine now and for the longer term, as long as it takes for Ukraine to have an acceptable bargaining position. I support that wholeheartedly. But how do you want to sustain the constant flow of weapons? I'm from Germany. I'm upset about the reluctance of our government to deliver the real heavy weapons. It's nothing about not FOCUS, not Marder, not Leopard. Nothing is delivered. I think if the largest European NATO country refuses to deliver what needs to be delivered, although it is available to be delivered, I think that is passive support for this utterly fascist Russian regime. By refusing deliveries to Ukraine, you passively support Russia. So I urge you behind the scenes to do the utmost to pressure the German government to do what they should do according to their size and to their responsibility within NATO and the EU. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For the S&D, Tonino Pizzula.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Secretary General, thank you for your time and remarks. Yes, the recent NATO summit, first one since Russian brutal invasion of Ukraine, sent us a message that allied we are much stronger than soon we will have additional EU states in the NATO. Indeed, stronger EU-NATO cooperation contributes to effective global governance and multilateralism. The current situation is offering us an opportunity to work together in new ways, and I believe our citizens welcome such an effort. I would say that NATO has definitely regained its sometimes disputed value. With warmongering, Lavrov talking about the new Iron Curtain, it's of utmost importance to invest in capabilities to protect our citizens and ensure security. Therefore, I would like to ask you 3 questions. Questions on security challenges in Western Balkan region. How do you see EU-NATO cooperation in that region? The NATO strategic concept definitely upgraded current approach and addressed more bluntly our challenges, strategic competitors and potential adversaries. How do you see the role of China and Russia in the Western Balkans? Furthermore, along with the strategic concept, the Madrid Summit Declaration decided on new measures to step up tailored political and practical support to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Can you be more specific on this? And finally, in B&H, we have general elections coming up in autumn, and security situation and tensions are worrying. Is NATO monitoring the situation closely? Thank you for your answers.
Thank you, Tonino. For the Renew Group, I understand Petras Ostrevichus. Or
Very fine.
Well, we're doing one speaker per group now, and then we'll do another round. But please, I don't want to interfere and renew. Okay, Petros.
Thank you, Chair. And Secretary General, most welcome to our committee, and thank you for your presentation. And indeed, clear and very committing words, and your activities, we just saw it happening in Madrid. I appreciate and I welcome two new members of NATO, as Finland and Sweden, to come. How about the others who might be, expressing their wish and readiness to join and asking for our political as well as technical support in this regard? I mean, would you a bit expand on as you said, the door of NATO remains open? What does it mean in practice? I mean, will be some maps, so-called membership action plans, extended to those who are, knocking on the door of NATO, or are there any plans in this regard how to strengthen their commitment and their wish to join NATO? Thank you.
Thank you. For the Greens, Reinhard Bütikofer.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, SecGen. I have three remarks. First, I agree completely with what Mr. Gahler said, that we should provide all the arms necessary to help defending Ukraine. But while he is upset that my German government is not delivering more arms, I'm upset that his previous government did not procure the arms that he would like to deliver. My second remark is on China. I commend the language that you have included in the strategic document, but I would like to ask about implementation, and I give you an example. Presently, we have a discussion in Germany about the exportation of diesel engines, powerful diesel engines, to the PLA Navy. This has been known for the last 5 years at least, and nothing is being done about it. Are you going to organize common efforts to have stringent export controls in the transatlantic theater? And lastly, my third question, how many names, SecGen, are on the Turkish list of extradition requests from Sweden and Finland?
Thank you. For the ID group, Ms. Bonfrisco.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Secretary General Stoltenberg. February 24 is Europe 9/11. Russia's war by choice represented a shift in European security perspective. Since then, every country in Europe has recalculated its own assessment of its own security. Sweden and Finland will guarantee additional security and stability, giving a positive impact on alliance military defense posture. Having said that, my question is, how can we assure that European defense spending will reinforce the transatlantic community? And what is the EU role in crisis management? The war in Ukraine has shown the need for unity. How can this be assured in the future if cooperation between the two organizations is hampered by respective internal vetoes? Thank you.
Thank you. For the ECR, Anna Fotyga.
Thank you, Chair. Secretary General, thank you very much indeed for your briefing and your willingness to address us every year. It's extremely important. I really welcome results of the Madrid summit, as you rightly say, in response to Putin's blackmail presented in December of previous year. Yet we know that ultimate response to this blackmail depends on Ukraine's ability to deter, to actually win this war of aggression, and our unity and will to assist Ukraine, possibly jointly, and that is, in my opinion, the main task in cooperation, future cooperation between NATO and EU, to find ways and areas to effectively assist Ukraine. In a political declaration, actually, this cooperation between EU and NATO is, as far as I know, number 18th of priorities, and not very comprehensive, although military mobility is of utmost importance also to this effect. Ukraine has not only a right to defend itself. The result of this war is to affect many nations, not only in neighborhood, but in Western Balkans, for example, and also in other places. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. For the left, Mick Wallace.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you, Mr. Stoltenberg. In Madrid, you said that China's stated ambitions and coercive policies challenge our interests, security and values. Well, when it comes to our interests, would you accept that it wouldn't be in Europe's interest to be falling out with China, given that they are our biggest trading partner? We buy a lot from them, they buy a lot from us. I mean, the thoughts of them putting an end to buying manufactured goods from Germany, even cars, would be pretty scary for employment figures in Germany, not to talk about business interests. In relation to security, you say that they're a security risk to the people of Europe. I don't really see the evidence of that myself, and do you accept the fact that the Americans last year spent $800 billion on defence? It was more than the next 9 countries put together, including Russia and China. Now, you say that China is substantially building up its military forces. Well, most independent observers would see it as being more defensive than offensive. What would be your comment on that? And the last one, values. Now, I raised this with the Sec-Gen of the EEAS yesterday, and when I challenged him on this notion that there's a battle to be fought over values, he said, so, when speaking of China, so it is a model. Then we can decide whether we want to live in that model or in our model. That if we want to continue living in our model, then we have to stand up to the challenge that China is posing for us at this stage. Do you not think that we can actually have our values, our model, and they can have theirs? China is a very established culture, and they mightn't do things like we do them, and we don't do things like they do them. I mean, do you not see a prospect where we actually can live in peace? Or do you actually foresee a possible war in the next few years between the US and China? Thank you very much.
Thank you. For the non-in-stream, Kostas Papadakis is on my list.
Thank you, Chair. Οι αποφάσεις που πήρε το ΝΑΤΟ στη Σύνοδο της Μαδρίτης σηματοδοτούν επιθετικό πολεμικό δόγμα, συνέχεια και κλιμάκωση του προηγούμενου με δεκαπλασιασμό των στρατευμάτων στην Ευρώπη, που μέχρι χθες περικύκλωναν ήδη τη Ρωσία και με νέα εκτείναξη των εξοπλισμών και πολλαπλασιασμό των στρατιωτικών βάσεων που θα πληρώσουν και πάλι λαοί. Τρανή απόδειξη ότι το ΝΑΤΟ μαζί με τις ΗΠΑ και την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση ούτε πριν ούτε μετά την απαράδεκτη ρώσικη εισβολή αρνήθηκαν ποτέ. Πάντα επιθετική και αντίπαλη με τα συμφέροντα των λαών, όπως και αυτού της Ουκρανίας, που θυσιάστηκε στον ανταγωνισμό του ευρωατλαντισμού με τη Ρωσία για σφαίρες επιρροής. Η ελληνική κυβέρνηση ισχυρίζεται ότι οι νατοικές αποφάσεις συνιστούν ασφάλεια απέναντι στην τουρκική επιθετικότητα, η οποία αμφισβητεί την κυριαρχία και ζητά την αποστρατιωτικοποίηση ελληνικών νησιών, μεθοδεύει γεωτρήσεις
believes that NATO decisions will offer more safety against Turkish aggression, which Turkey that is challenging its territorial rights and wants to demilitarize the Greek islands, while they are continuously violating territorial rights of Greece. But NATO never denounced this, and because they do not recognize borders between Greece and Turkey. They just say, figure it out, we train you to. And basically, the border classes between Greece and Turkey are fighting it out. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to our rapporteur for the 2021 NATO report, Antonio Istúriz López-White.
Thank you, Chairman. Señor Secretario General, enhorabuena. A nivel personal, creo que ha hecho usted un trabajo excelente y ha llevado con mano firme una negociación sobre el informe de la OTAN que se presentaba complicado sobre ese futuro, esos 10 años, esa estrategia. Yo creo que tenemos que estar todos agradecidos como España, sobre todo por la organización del evento. Muchas gracias a la OTAN y quiero extenderlo también a la ciudad de Madrid, a su ayuntamiento y comunidad autónoma. Lo hago también a la mitad del Gobierno de España, porque usted sabe, Secretario General, que la otra mitad del Gobierno de España estaba manifestándose contra la OTAN y haciendo una cumbre alternativa. Cosas exóticas de la política española, no le quiero abrumar con detalles. Y hay dos cuestiones que a los españoles les interesa. Nos ha quedado alguna duda sobre un resultado, al final, yo creo, mucho mejor de lo esperado. Estos dos temas son uno y, en general, el flanco sur, el Mediterráneo. Usted entenderá que hay países como España, Italia, etcétera, Grecia, que nos importa mucho el flanco mediterráneo. Hemos oído poco y queríamos saber de usted si ha habido también en las conversaciones algunos avances en esta materia. No estamos muy preocupados, la crisis alimentaria, energética, la zona del Sahel, Magreb, etcétera, etcétera. Lo sabe usted muy bien. Y luego dos, una cuestión ya muy particular de España. Se nos informa que el presidente del Gobierno y el Gobierno tuvieron conversaciones sobre la cuestión de las ciudades autónomas de Ceuta y Melilla, que son muy queridas para nuestro país, son parte de nuestro territorio, y siempre ha habido un poco de confusión si están introducidas, ¿no?, en el artículo 5, en caso de un ataque armado contra un miembro de la Alianza, estén incluidas como es parte integral del territorio de España. Usted sabe que tenemos esta cuestión en España que nos es muy querida. Quería saber si ha habido también algún comentario o algún debate sobre ello también al marco de esta reunión. Nada más que volver a agradecerle todo lo que ha hecho.
Thank you, Tono. Colleagues, I would propose that we now give the floor to Secretary General for a first round of answers. Perhaps you can limit yourself to 10-12 minutes. Then we have a second round of colleagues who would still like to take the floor.
No. Thank you so much. There are many questions I will try to answer, but in 10-12 minutes it's not obvious that I will be able to go into details for all of them. But first, Mr. Galler asked me about the EU, NATO, and maybe we should focus more on concrete issues. Also, first of all, the 74 are concrete, the 74 project, but that's big and small. I agree with that. But I think that if you just look at what we do together, we actually do more together now, NATO and the EU, than we have ever done before. We see how, for instance, how we work together when it comes to cyber. We share real-time information on cyber attacks. We work together in Kosovo, where we have NATO military presence, thousands of NATO troops, supporting the efforts of the EU mediator, the EU-facilitated dialogue Pristina-Belgrade. The Ukraine crisis has demonstrated how we work together. I went actually the first time ever NATO Secretary General had traveled together with the EU President was Ursula von der Leyen. President von der Leyen and me traveling to Lithuania and Latvia. That was last fall when we had the crisis building up, and we sent a very clear message of solidarity, standing together with NATO EU members in the Baltic region. And then I also mentioned the Aegean Sea. It's very easy to forget, but actually, after a request from Germany, it was back in 2015, to ensure the implementation of the agreement between Turkey and EU, NATO decided to have a maritime presence of naval ships in the Aegean Sea to help to implement the agreement between the European Union and Turkey. And that brings together Frontex, Turkey. I'm not saying everything is easy, but I'm saying at least one important contribution to solving a difficult problem for NATO and for Europe. And then I think on resilience, there was a question here about export. I'll come back to that. But I think it's obvious now that I have been, for my political life, a strong supporter of free trade. And I still believe in trade as a way to promote prosperity, economic growth. It's good for us to trade. That's a good thing. But at the same time, we have to be not naive. And free trade does not always promote freedom. So that's obvious when you now see the dependence, for instance, on a specific commodity, Russian gas. We see it also when China tried to take control of the 5G networks. I think it's obvious now. That was a controversial issue not so long time ago. But NATO, EU, we activated ourselves and ensured that actually there was also a security assessment related to foreign control or Chinese control over our 5G networks. So both when it comes to imports, to heavy dependence on specific commodities, gas or rare earth minerals from China or gas from Russia. When it comes to exports of key technologies, or it comes to control over critical infrastructure in our own countries, we need to make sure that security is more important than free trade. And this is about resilience. This is about trade policies for EU, of course, and EU has some unique competence there. But it also matters for all those allies that are not member of the EU. And you have to remember that there are 150 million Europeans who live in a NATO country that is not member of the European Union. And then you have 400 million people living in the United States and Canada, 1 billion in total. So yes, the EU plays an important role, but it has to be coordinated with NATO. It covers a much bigger part of the world economy. So in this area, it's obviously that we need to work more closely together, and we have started that conversation. Many asked about the importance of flow of weapons. I will not go into the specific national debates, but just rest assured, NATO is pushing strongly for more support, the constant flow of support, and more heavy weapons, advanced weapons. And you also see how now, especially United States, but also United Kingdom and some other allies, have provided very modern military equipment, the HIMARS and other long-range precision artillery, which now is making a difference on the battlefield. Yes, we will follow up on that. Then. Pisula, you asked me about the Western Balkans. Yes, of course, we are working together with the European Union and Western Balkans. It is extremely important. NATO has a history there. We helped to end 2 brutal ethnic wars, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo. We have a military presence there. We work actually together with the European Union, Althea, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we are closely monitoring the situation in the Western Balkans in general. I met actually today with the Albanian Prime Minister, NATO ally, and of course we follow the situation extremely closely, and we also are concerned about the presence of China and Russia. Then Petras, you asked me about the other countries. Well, the reality is that there are now 3 other countries which are inspiring for NATO membership. That's Ukraine, Georgia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnia and Herzegovina, I mean, there are serious challenges in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We try to help them to strengthen their also democratic institutions, but you know the problems in Bosnia and Herzegovina as well as I do. On Georgia and Ukraine, 2 different countries, the main focus now is on Ukraine to provide support to help Ukraine prevail as an independent sovereign nation. And that's the main focus. The focus is not on membership now, but of course everything we do to help and support and also modernize Ukrainian defense and security institutions will also move them closer to membership at some stage. Georgia, again, main focus is reforms to help them move towards NATO membership. But as you also know, any decisions on membership requires unanimity. All allies need to agree, and we don't have, agreement within NATO to now take the next step and to have membership action plan. focus on reforms, and then hopefully one day we can also go one step further. Butikofer, China, I think I mentioned that. Yeah, export of diesel, yeah, you actually mentioned those, and I feel I answered that question. Trade has to be part of the security assessment. Trade is not separate from security. Trade is part of the security considerations we have to make in a more competitive world, also related to China. Then you asked me about the issue of extradition of people from Finland and Sweden. The agreement between Finland and Sweden, the joint memorandum, is public. You can read it. And what they have agreed is what's stated there. Nothing more, nothing less. And I'm not able to quote it directly now, but the main message there is that they are going to work more closely together in fighting terrorism. And you have to remember that PKK is a terrorist organization according to the European Union. It's regarded as a terrorist organization by Finland, Sweden, and the European Union, all EU members. And to exchange intelligence, to work together, to also address requests for extradition, that's fair enough. It's important. But of course, any extradition or any expulsion of individuals will be, and that's directly is also addressed in the agreement, will be done in accordance with the European Convention on Extradition, and of course based on Swedish and Finnish law and the legal system. So yes, they will work more closely on working and to fight terrorism, but decisions will be made based on the rule of law and the European Convention on Extradition, stated in the agreement. Ms. Bonfrisco, European defense spending. I think. For me, it's a paradox, because I've been a politician. I think I told you before, for many years, and it's always nicer to ask for more money for health, for education, for infrastructure than for defense. But since I arrived in NATO in 2014, my main message is spend more on defense. And the reality, we have to be honest, if you spend more on defense, there is less for something else. That's the brutal reality. But the brutal reality is that we live in a more dangerous world. So actually, I'm very glad that over the last year, since 2014, NATO allies have spent more on defense. So we have more high readiness forces. We can deploy more to the eastern part of the alliance. And that is needed because we are faced with more challenges. And we have a good story to tell, because all allies have increased defense spending and really added a lot. Then Anna Fotyga, well, you have very clear messages on Russia, and I also very much agree on your concerns about Russia. Russia has proven that President Putin is a leader that is willing to use military force to reach his political aims. I have worked for dialogue with Russia for many years, because I actually believe that we should try to strive for a better relationship. But especially after the second invasion of Ukraine, also in February this year, I think that the way we try to approach Russia, we cannot continue, because Russia has totally walked away from any kind of meaningful dialogue with them as long as they behave in the way they now behave. Then Mike Wallace, China. Well, and then as China is defensive. Well, so why do they then invest so heavily in new long-range nuclear weapons? And more? And why do they actually deploy all these new submarines? And why do they behave the way they behave, for instance, in the South China Sea? And then, well, of course, I respect that China is a different country than Europe or Norway or the other countries in this room. But for me, some human rights values are universal. The freedom of speech is not something we just have in the western part of the world. It's something we believe that every human being has the right to do. So when they crack down on free press, arrest journalists, writers, those who disagree, that's fundamentally violating values we all believe in. Also, I respect people being communists, people being against what I'm in favor of, whatever they are. But that's their right to disagree. that right doesn't exist in China because you're arrested. And that's, I think, values which are important for all, regardless of whether we are left or right in the political landscape in this, also in the European Union or in NATO. Then Papadakis, well, NATO is not. NATO is an offensive organization. No, NATO's main task, main responsibility is to preserve peace, prevent conflict, and deterrence and defense is something we invest in to prevent conflict. We have done so successfully for more than 70 years, and we are going to continue to do so to prevent an attack on our countries. Then Lopez Isturiz White. First of all, thank you so much to Madrid, to Spain for hosting an excellent summit. It was really an historic summit in a beautiful place. We went to the Prado Museum, we went to the Royal Castle, and we made also important political decisions. We also addressed the southern flank. We agreed a package for capacity building with Mauritania. We will also work with Tunisia, and of course NATO has to have a 360-degree approach, including also the south. Then I think I have covered most of them. At least I've spent my time, so that's everything for so far.
Thank you. Colleagues, we have 25 minutes left. If you try and keep it to 1.5 minutes each, then we might give all the colleagues the floor who want to speak. For the EPP, the first one is our colleague David Lega.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Stoltenberg, for being here today and being so clear in your remarks, both regarding Russia and China and other countries. I mean, we are very well aware that the last couple of months have been, to say the least, very hectic, not only with the Russian war of aggression, but also with the accession process of Sweden and Finland. And as a Swede, I am particularly grateful for the hard work that you have put into to help embrace Sweden and Finland into our NATO family. So with that said, I ask you a few questions on that. First, what do you think is the estimated timeline for Finland and Sweden to become full members? And what further obstacles do you foresee, if any? And the other one, could you elaborate a little bit on Sweden's future role within NATO? How can Sweden contribute the best? And finally, one question also on Iran, your thoughts on the latest news that Iran is planning to sell armored drones to Russia and also help to actually use them. How does that affect the stability on that region? Thank you.
Thank you, David. Next is Sven Mikser, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Secretary General. One observation, one question. First, I very much welcome the focus on deterrence and defense. Deterrence especially, I think, is tricky because the concept presumes that you are dealing with a rational actor who makes a cost-benefit analysis before any adventure. And the Ukraine has shown us that if Russian leaders make such an analysis at all, they are definitely ready to take much more pain for the quest of restoring an empire than we previously thought possible. So we must look at deterrence in a new light. But my question has to do with the weapons donations. You said that, and rightly so, that we need to keep donating as long as it takes. But I've seen that especially in European capitals, there is now more talk about the need to, after this first round of rather generous donations, the need to replenish our own depleted stocks. And therefore, my question is, how confident are you that the capitals are putting forward necessary financial resources to simultaneously be able to replenish their own depleted stocks and also keep on giving to Ukraine, because it's a war attrition now, and the attrition of equipment especially is enormous in such a situation. And also, I am confident that our defense industries are capable of coping with this challenge of delivering to our own nations and simultaneously to keeping on giving this more modern Western type of equipment to Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Baltha Diaz.
Thank you, Chair. Muchísimas gracias. Y, Secretario General, le quiero felicitar precisamente por el éxito de la Cumbre de Madrid, que todos disfrutamos precisamente como receptores, como quienes pudimos vivirlo de primera mano. En términos generales, ha sido un verdadero éxito y solamente falta que el nuevo concepto estratégico esté a la altura de las amenazas presentes y futuras que nos acecharán durante los próximos años. La apertura del proceso de adhesión de Suecia y Finlandia es una grandísima noticia. Tiene dos vertientes. Una, que aumentamos el número, obviamente, de aliados, pero también aumentamos el número de kilómetros que defender en frontera con Rusia. Y permítame, voy a ir muy sintéticamente a tres preguntas que para mí son fundamentales. Dentro de lo que es el ámbito del concepto estratégico y la definición en el ámbito geográfico. Digamos, en falta mayor concreción en el ámbito de la vecindad sur de la Alianza, y ahí tendría dos preguntas concretas. En el primer sentido, ¿está la OTAN monitorizando los elementos de desestabilización que se producen precisamente en la región del Sahel, así como en la zona norte, y en ese caso como consecuencia de la guerra de Rusia, que provocará una falta de alimentos, y el hambre es uno grande de los factores desestabilizantes? Quisiera hacer una pregunta también en sentido sumamente importante, muy explícita, en ese sentido, que hace referencia a España. Las ciudades autónomas de Ceuta y Melilla. Yo sé que esa pregunta se la han hecho en anteriores ocasiones, pero todavía no tenemos respuesta a los españoles. ¿Estarán protegidas Ceuta y Melilla bajo el amparo del artículo 5 del tratado, porque son los tratados lo que valen y no las intenciones políticas? Y finalmente, acabo, presidente, una última pregunta. Hay una previsión de la OTAN de intervenir en el Sahel, en el caso concreto de Mali, porque el día después de la cumbre de la OTAN, el ministro de Asuntos Exteriores español dijo que no descartaba la actuación de la OTAN en Mali. ¿Es cierto? Muchas gracias, presidente.
Thank you. Please try and limit it to 1.5 minutes. Be fair. Viola von Kramon.
Yeah, thank you, General Secretary, for all the comprehensive information you have shared with us. I mean, the role of Turkey was shortly mentioned also by my colleague Reinhard Bütikofer, but I would like to come back of the possibility of opening the Black Sea and also mediating in terms of the grain deliveries from the port of Odessa. I know that regarding the Treaty of Montreux, it is impossible for any weapon or maritime ships from NATO and others, but are you in contact with the Turkish maritime fleet, and what would be the conditions for the Turkish to be more involved to open the port of Odessa and get the grain storages or the grain deliveries out there? And then regarding the German delivery, I mean, my colleague Michael Gahler has mentioned that, but it seems to be very asymmetric. When I look through the partners in the NATO alliance, it seems to be very much biased on the partners in the East and the Central European countries. What is your expectation, especially towards the German government, in terms of what you said? We will deliver to Ukraine whatever it takes, and we see there's quite a bias towards certain member states.
Thank you. Ms. Ciccardi.
Grazie Presidente, grazie Segretario Generale. Le conseguenze dei due nuovi ingressi determina il fatto che la linea di confine tra i paesi NATO e la Federazione Russa si allargherà di oltre 1300 km. Questo, considerando l'interesse preminente degli USA sempre più nell'Indo-Pacifico, significa che sarà compito europeo gestire la nuova frontiera. A proposito di frontiera meridionale, è già stato anticipato prima da un collega, ma vorrei soffermarmi sulla Libia. Gli interessi di Turchia e Russia sul paese sono tantissimi. Sappiamo quanto è importante la Libia per il terrorismo, le infiltrazioni terroristiche in Europa e le migrazioni. Quindi il piano NATO o comunque l'intervento NATO per gestire la situazione molto critica in Libia. E il 28 maggio, esattamente 20 anni fa, nella base dell'aeronautica militare a pratica di mare furono firmati gli accordi tra Russia e NATO e il tentativo era quello di fare entrare la NATO nell'architettura di sicurezza comune. È passato molto tempo da allora, ma che cosa veramente si è inceppato in questo meccanismo? E poi sulla Moldavia esistono dei piani pronti e mezzi per attuarli nel caso di una guerra e di un'invasione che dovesse coinvolgere anche la Moldavia. Per quanto riguarda invece il nuovo assetto delineato dal vertice di Madrid, che avvicinerà ulteriormente Mosca a Pechino, che cosa si prevede di fare sul fronte Taiwan?
What are we going to do about Taiwan?
Thank you. Next is our Vice Chair, Witold Waszczykowski.
Yes, thank you, Chair, Secretary General. I had the pleasure to participate also in Madrid summit about 25 years ago, in 1997, when we were invited. Now I speak as a concerned citizen of Poland, a neighbor of aggressor, a neighbor of victim of aggression. In 140 days of this aggression, we were expecting that VJTF is going to activate it, that your initiative from 2018 about 30 is going to be activated. We are expecting this response forces in the eastern flank, and we are expecting the deployment of Patriot missiles next to the Suwalki Gap, where we are threatened by Iskander missile. Nothing of this happened. I don't even remember that Article 4 was activated. Now you are promising us the even bigger response for 300,000 troops, and in strategic concept, Russia is named as a threat. Well, global warming is a threat, climate change is a threat. Russia for us is enemy. So how we can reassure right now us that NATO is prepared not only to reconquer overtaken territory by Russia, but will deter any aggression of Russia on the eastern flank. Thank you.
Thank you, Witold. Next is for the EPP, Mr. Milan Mon. Okay,
Yo también quiero felicitar al secretario general de la OTAN por la excelente organización de la cumbre en Madrid. ¿Cuáles son los ecos en Estados Unidos de esta cumbre? ¿Cree usted que en el futuro, dentro de 2 años, en el nuevo contexto electoral de Estados Unidos, esta cumbre, su buen resultado, la cohesión de los socios, puede servir para mejorar la imagen de la organización en los Estados Unidos, incluso los dirigentes del Partido Republicano? Y en el electorado republicano, me preocupan las elecciones del año 24 a la vista de lo que sucedió con la escasa valoración por el presidente Trump de la organización hace unos años.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to the Secretary General Stoltenberg. Always happy and glad to see Nordic fellow colleagues in such important position, especially in this time of serious situation globally. And thank you for frank and straightforward answers. Russia's unacceptable demands on NATO has indeed led to more NATO decisions of each country's membership in any international organizations, be it NATO, be it EU, is of course up to each and every country. It is historical that Finland and Sweden was invited to join NATO, and now our membership application is being signed by the member states in NATO. Thank you, Stoltenberg, Secretary General Stoltenberg, for the leadership that you have been taking in order to ensure that both Sweden and Finland is invited. And I also actually have a question as my other Nordic colleague here in the Parliament, David Lega, on could you maybe please tell us a bit more about the development right now, both progresses and the challenges that exist? And then finally also I would like to conclude with posing a question on if you could share with us how you, but also NATO as an organization, work on ensuring that no current NATO member state is violating international law and do not attack important NATO and EU allies that are fighting extremism and terrorism in different parts of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kubilius.
Thanks, Chair. And Secretary General, really, congratulations with really very important decisions on the summit. And you are showing, NATO is showing good example also for EU, how to come out from this crisis becoming stronger. This is geopolitical crisis, and we need to learn lessons, and we need to change ourselves. So your decisions were very good. NATO really is a defensive organization, but it's becoming stronger with, Sweden and Finland joining NATO, even when Finland has a long border with Russia. In your personal opinion, Mr. General Secretary, when Ukraine will join NATO after the war, will NATO become stronger?
Thank you. Mr. Heineloma.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and may I also thank Secretary General for your leadership in these demanding times. The decisions in Madrid were really important ones for the security of the whole Europe. I'm, of course, especially happy that Finland and Sweden were accepted as member countries of NATO. At the same time, we have noticed that perhaps Turkey has not totally accepted this decision, and I'm afraid to say that they are using the question of terrorism in a way to bargain something both from Finland and Sweden and also perhaps from other countries. However, Finland and Sweden are totally against terrorism as all the European Union nations. But at the same time, we must respect the basic rights of our citizens, and we cannot deport those people who are lawful citizens of our countries, and this must be understood. If Turkey is ready to bargain here for a long time, it can mean that the ratification process will be longer. And my question to you is is this something which you have thought, that if it will take time, is NATO ready to do something to make sure that the security is strengthened in the Northern Europe before Sweden and Finland will become member states of NATO?
Thank you. Herman Tertsch.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Yo también quiero felicitarle al señor Stoltenberg por la cumbre y por la rápida incorporación que estamos llevando a cabo el proceso de incorporación de Suecia y de Finlandia, que es sin duda una valiosísima aportación. Simplemente quería recordarle que pese a todas las afirmaciones seguimos teniendo una inquietud en España con la cuestión siempre reiterada de la protección de Ceuta y Melilla, dos ciudades amenazadas, dos ciudades españolas amenazadas, en un frente muy complicado también que tenemos nosotros en el sur. Y finalmente es preguntarle ¿qué piensa, cómo puede repercutir la conducta de Francia y Alemania, el prestigio de Francia y Alemania a medio plazo dentro de la OTAN, si no puede crear una fisura, el hecho de que haya una convicción ya entre muchos miembros de la OTAN de que tanto Berlín como París están saboteando el esfuerzo defensivo por parte de Ucrania y que están, pese a sus reiteradas afirmaciones en sentido contrario, están realmente bloqueando todas las ayudas que tenían que haber prestado ya para estar al nivel de los esfuerzos defensivos de los demás países de la OTAN y que esto puede crear una ruptura de credibilidad irreversible en algún momento. Muchas gracias.
Благодаря, господин председател. Уважаеми господин Столтенберг. Най-напред взимам повод от думите на колегата Михаил Галер и да кажа същото като него, а именно, че аз се срамувам от решението на българското правителство of the decision of the Bulgarian government not to send the necessary weapons to the Ukrainian military. And my question is, have you discussed this with the Bulgarian government? Given Bulgaria has the necessary Soviet-era weapons. And my second question is, how are NATO's relations developing with Serbia? Because in Southeastern Europe and the Western Balkans, Serbia is a country with very close ties with Russia.
И обслужва руските политически интереси в региона. В този смисъл тя представлява заплаха за сигурността на Европейския съюз в този регион. Благодаря за вниманието.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right here, Mr. Stoltenberg, right here. With Putin's invasion in Ukraine, I think that many more European citizens realize that a firm and stronger NATO, acting in the interest of democratic values and international law, are indeed in the interest of our EU values. With that in mind, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Perhaps I will give you a key from the very beginning. The answer to this might be the same. As a Secretary General of NATO, are you aware of any member of NATO who is more of autocratic than democratic? Are you aware of any member of NATO that is head state is acting in romance sometimes or quite a few times with Putin? Are you aware of any member of NATO who is not adopting the sanctions against Russia? Are you aware of any member of NATO who is acting against international law, acting against our values and threatening other members of NATO? And a key, the answer to all these questions might be the same. Thank you.
Thank you. Fabio Castaldo.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I would like also to applaud Secretary General Stoltenberg and the whole NATO structure for the results obtained at the historical summit in Madrid. I would like to reiterate a bit on the concept of the importance to really commit on the stability of this neighborhood in both strategic direction, east and south, reminding also that Russia is much more strengthening its presence also in south and as well as interferences. We have full of examples in Mali, in Libya, in Sudan. Therefore, dear Secretary General, I would like to hear your consideration on the future of EU-NATO cooperation for what concerns the MENA region, the southern flank. Do you believe that the EU should become in the future the main security provider in the area, and do you think that the EU might be better equipped to face certain threats, for instance the condition conducive to the spread of terrorism thanks to the instrument already in its toolbox, and which kind of specific support and expertise can NATO make available in our strong cooperation? Second, I have noticed that in the NATO strategic concept is written that the full involvement of non-EU allies in EU defense efforts is essential. I was wondering what does it mean exactly in practical terms. Could you maybe eventually elaborate a bit further on this sentence included in the NATO strategic concept? Does it imply deeper coordination and alignment of the NATO defense planning process and the EU capability development plan, or do you deem as necessary also to expand the participation of non-EU NATO allies in PESCO and EDF projects further? And which kind of synergies we can find in NATO initiatives, most notably the recently Innovation Fund? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fabio. And to conclude, Thijs Reuten, and then we have a spot landing, and then we have 8 minutes for the Secretary General to answer all the questions. Thijs.
Thank you, Chair. I will be very quick. One question on U4 Althea. The mandate is going to expire. 264 Security Council mandate elapses on 3rd of November. While concerns over the stability in Bosnia-Herzegovina are raising, some fear a veto that might block Althea's extension, and it would likely end also the UN mandate for NATO presence in Bosnia, which would be regrettable. In what way will NATO continue to contribute to peace and stability in Bosnia-Herzegovina in case of such an eventuality? And thank you so much, Mr. Secretary General, for all your commitment.
Thank you, Thijs. Back to you, Jens.
Thank you so much. There is no way I can answer every question in the few minutes I have left, and I just have to leave. But let me then just address some of the main topics you have raised. First, on Ukraine. Yes, it is extremely important that we as politicians make sure that our countries provide support to Ukraine. And not only provide support to Ukraine, but provide substantial support to Ukraine for a long time. And that will have a price. Part of the price, the sanctions are important, but also, of course, the military support, but also the humanitarian support, the economic support, that has a price. But the price of not supporting them is much higher. Partly because, for me, this is a moral issue. This is about a sovereign, independent nation with more than 40 million people living in Europe, which is brutally attacked by a big power, Russia. If we don't react to that, and after we have seen what happened in Bucha and other places, it violates my understanding of, decent behavior of neighbors and friends of Ukraine. So of course, yes, it has a price. But not to act and just let that brutality continue and let that brutality of Russia be awarded is for me a higher price. Second, it is in our interest to help Ukraine. Because you have to understand that if Ukraine loses this, that's a danger for us. That will make Europe even more vulnerable for Russian aggression. Because then the lesson learned from Georgia in 2008, from annexing Crimea in 2014, from starting to undermine Donbass in 2014, and then the full-fledged brutal invasion by President Putin in February, is that they can just use force. They get their will. It's to re-establish an idea of spheres of influence, where big powers can decide what smaller neighbors can do. And that will make all of us more vulnerable. So even if you don't care about the moral aspect of this, supporting the people of Ukraine, you should care about your own security interest. So therefore you have to pay. Pay for the support, pay for the humanitarian aid, pay the consequences of the economic sanctions, because the alternative is to pay a much higher price later on. And then remember one thing, yes, we pay a price, but the price we pay as the European Union, as NATO, is a price we can measure in currency, in money. The price they pay is measured in lives, lost every day. So we should just stop complaining and step up and provide support, full stop. And I think it's also, to be honest, it's impossible to convey this message, because it is a possibility that this will last. It's not over necessarily by the summer. Wars are hard to predict. They may take time. Then we need also to address work with the defense industries, as Sven Mixer addressed, that we need to be able to provide the equipment, produce more, so we can help them. Then on Finland and Sweden, many questions, and that was partly also related to the timelines. Well, what I can say is that so far this is the quickest ever accession process. Finland and Sweden applied in May, mid-May, and we invited them when was that? 2 weeks ago? When was that? Just after the summit, 2 days after the summit, the beginning of July. Has never happened before. So quick. Then the next phase of this accession process is ratification in 30 parliaments. And as a former minister and prime minister, I'm always very careful to give advice to parliaments. But so far, many parliaments have already ratified. It's also the fastest ever process so far. But of course, we need 30 parliaments to ratify. So if anything, you can help me by talking to your friends in the national parliaments and encourage them to do this as quickly as possible to make sure that Finland and Sweden can join. Then NATO allies have already provided security assurances to Finland and Sweden in this interim period. NATO has increased its presence in that part of the world. So yes, we will also take care of that interim period. Then the South, NATO can do more, but I don't believe that big military operations are the answers to the instability we see in the South. I think the best thing we can do is to work with partners like Mauritania, like Tunisia and others, build capacity, train, and help them to stabilize their own countries. We can do more of that, and that was one of the decisions from Madrid. The last thing is the question I got from Milan was about U.S. and if they elect a new U.S. president. Well, I would say that NATO's history is about the fact that we are different nations with different political parties in charge from both sides of the Atlantic, sometimes also disagreeing fundamentally on many issues, but always being able to agree around the core task to protect and defend each other. As long as we stand together, North America and Europe, we are safe. Because then we are 50% of the world's military might and 50% of the world's economic might. So we just need to stand together. And yes, of course, they can. I don't know who will be the next president in the United States, but what I do know is that when President Trump was president, we had some, challenging discussions, but the United States did not reduce their presence in Europe. They stayed. And that's partly because there's a very strong bipartisan support to NATO in the United States, both Republicans and Democrats. They disagree on many things, on climate change, Iran, and abortion, and many other things. But on NATO, they agree. So the very strong bipartisan support makes me certain that the United States is actually committed to European security, because it's in their interest and in European interest that we stand together. And if anything, the war in Ukraine just highlights the importance of not doing anything that divides Europe and North America. I believe in Europe and North America together in strategic solidarity. As long as we stand together, we are safe. That's my main message. Thank you.
Dear Jens, also in the name of Raza, for Seda, and on behalf of all colleagues, let me just say one word. Thank you. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for answering all these questions. Thank you for your comments. And what I said to you personally, I want to repeat here. I want to thank you personally for the excellent job you are doing as NATO Secretary General in these times. Once again, on behalf of all our colleagues, thank you in these challenging times.
Thank you so much.